Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a choice not out of love, but out of duty, and watched it turn into something deeper than you ever expected? If stories like that speak to you, quiet stories, full of heart and second chances, tap like to let us know, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. The air inside the Whitmore estate felt older than its walls. The scent of cedar and old books lingered like memory. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, the silk hem of my dress brushing against polished wood, my hands clammy inside lace gloves. Below, soft music echoed through the chandelier-lit hall, too elegant to be joyful. It was my wedding day, and not once did I feel like a bride. I could hear the hush of expensive shoes across marble, the clink of crystal, the way people whispered like something sacred was being buried, not celebrated. They didn't know me, not really. I was the daughter of a ruined businessman and a sick woman, standing in the shadow of debt and obligation, the girl who agreed to marry a stranger not because she loved him, but because he agreed to cover what my father couldn't, and save what little I had left. And that stranger was Grant Whitmore. He stood at the end of the aisle, tall, severe, and unsmiling. A man sculpted out of restraint and reputation. His tuxedo fit like it was stitched into him. His eyes, cool gray, barely flicked toward mine as I walked forward, not out of shyness, but distance, detachment. I wasn't sure he even saw me. I had never spoken to him before that day, but I knew what he was. CEO, old money, a man who didn't need to marry anyone, especially someone like me. But he did, because of a contract, because of something between our fathers, something I had never been allowed to ask about. I walked past rows of unfamiliar faces, each looking at me like I was a well-arranged centerpiece, something to admire, not touch, not understand. The moment I reached Grant's side, I realized something deeper than nerves had taken hold. A quiet kind of grief. The kind you feel when you leave a version of yourself behind. The girl who once believed she'd fall in love. Be chosen. Be held like something precious. That girl wasn't here anymore. We said our vows, if you could call them that. Short, polite, practiced. He slipped the ring on my finger without trembling. I looked up only once, not at him, but at the ceiling. The chandelier above us glowed gold, throwing fractured light across the stone tiles. It should have felt holy. It felt like surrender. Later, when the guests had gone and the staff had disappeared behind heavy doors, I wandered through the quiet, halls in a gown that felt heavier than it should. Grant had retreated to his study. No one had shown me where I was supposed to sleep. So I walked, past oil paintings and silent staircases, through rooms that smelled of lemon polish and closed memories. That's when I found it. The library. It was tucked behind a thick wooden door on the east side of the house, dimly lit, filled with shelves that touched the ceiling, a room designed for legacy. I entered without thinking, drawn to the silence. There was a desk near the window. Old, scratched at the edges, like it had once been moved in a hurry and never forgiven for it. The drawers creaked as I pulled one open. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, was a letter. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I hoped it was a clue, a hint of who Grant was, or why this house felt so full of ghosts. But the name on the envelope stopped my breath. To Walter Whitmore. From ML, my mother's initials. I unfolded the letter with hands that weren't steady. Walter, I forgive you, not because you asked me to, but because I must. For myself, for my child. I know now you never meant to keep the promise. That it was easier for you to serve your family's legacy than to build one with me. But you gave me something, even in leaving. You gave me the clarity to raise her without bitterness. If she ever walks your halls, I pray she does not walk alone." MLI read the words twice, 3 times. The air in the library shifted, like the room knew it had given away a secret it had held for decades. My mother had once loved a Whitmore and had been left, and now I was here, in their house, wearing their name, married to their son, not because of love, because of something older, because of something owed. I folded the letter carefully, as if it might break. For the first time that night, my hands stopped shaking, because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one living in someone else's debt, and maybe Grant Whitmore wasn't just marrying me to solve a problem. Maybe he was paying a price he never spoke aloud. I returned to my room, wherever that was now, and placed the letter inside the drawer beside the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I lay down in the dress I hadn't changed out of, and stared at the ceiling as the house creaked softly around me. Somewhere across the hallway, the man, who was now my husband, sat behind a locked door, and I wondered if he knew that his family had once turned away from love, and that I had just become the consequence. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the absence of warmth. That was the kind of silence that followed me through the Whitmore estate the morning after the wedding. The sun spilled into the wide kitchen through tall windows, turning the marble countertops pale gold. But even light couldn't warm the space. It was spotless, still, as though no one had cooked there in years. There was no note, no breakfast, no sign of him. Grant, my husband. The word sat awkwardly in my throat, like trying to swallow something that never belonged there. I made tea with trembling hands. The cupboard doors sighed when I opened them. Expensive wood, soft hinges, all designed to keep noise out. The only sound in the kitchen was the whistle of the kettle, sharp and brief, like it regretted being heard. I sat by the window, drinking alone. Outside, the garden looked like something from a magazine, trimmed hedges, clean paths, a fountain that didn't splash. Perfect, but lifeless. I wondered if Grant was already at work. I hadn't seen him since the wedding. He hadn't come to my room, hadn't spoken a word after the ceremony. There was no guide, no welcome, no "how are you adjusting," just the cold efficiency of obligation. This wasn't a home. It was a holding place, and I was its quietest possession. That afternoon, I took a car, alone, and went back to the house I'd grown up in. A smaller place, cramped and creaking, but warm in all the right corners. The kind of home where you always knew someone would be in the kitchen, humming, even if it was just to themselves. Mom was there, seated at the window with a quilt across her lap, staring at the garden as if trying to memorize it before it changed again. When she saw me, she smiled, tired but true. "You made a beautiful bride," she said softly. "I watched the wedding on my phone." "You weren't supposed to." "I know," she nodded. "But I couldn't miss the moment you became someone's wife, even if I don't yet know what kind of man he is." I didn't answer, because I didn't know either. Instead, I knelt down, took her hands in mine, and rested my forehead against them. "I miss you already," I whispered. "I'm right here." Later, as I was washing some dishes, I noticed a paper bag on the counter, filled with boxes of medicine, the kind that had cost us everything, the kind I thought we couldn't afford anymore. "Did Dad come through?" I asked cautiously. "No." My mom shook her head. "A man from the pharmacy called, said everything was paid in full for the next 6 months." "By who?" "They didn't say, just that it's been handled." My hands stilled in. The water. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. That night, I stood at the threshold of Grant's study, unsure whether to knock or disappear. I could see him inside, sleeves rolled, jacket off, seated behind a desk that could have been carved from a single tree. He was reading, still, silent. I hovered, waiting for a flicker of acknowledgement. It didn't come, so I turned away. The next few days passed in a rhythmless blur. Meals I ate alone, rooms I wandered like a stranger in my own life. But the thought of that letter, and of my mother's connection to this house, stayed with me like a thread I couldn't unpick. One morning I returned to the library. This time, I didn't look for letters. I just sat, in the corner, wrapped in one of the old blankets someone had left on a chair. I traced the spines of the books with my eyes. Some had names I didn't recognize. Others had been read so often. The titles were almost faded, and for a moment I remembered being 7 years old. Sitting on the floor while Mom read out loud from Jane Eyre, her voice strong and soft, like the hum of something sturdy. She used to say, "A book is proof that someone was there before you, and wanted you to know you're not alone." But, in that house, I felt more alone than I had ever been. Later that week, a maid, quiet, kindly, brought a tray to my room. Dinner, soup, bread, tea. A folded note rested beside the cup. In Grant's handwriting, "You should see your mother tomorrow. I'll send the car at 9 a.m. That was all. No greeting, no apology. But something in the simplicity of it reached me, not for what it said, but for what it didn't need to say. He knew. He was watching from the corners of his silence. When I arrived at my mother's house the next day, she was brighter. She had slept well. The medicine was helping. We sat in the sunroom with tea and peeled apples, and for the first time since the wedding, she reached over and touched my cheek. "You look older," she said. "Do I?" "Not tired. Just more yourself." I didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But I held on to the words like seeds. Maybe someday they'd bloom. That evening, as I returned to the Whitmore estate, the house didn't feel warmer. But I did, and in the quiet of the grand hallway, I saw a flicker of movement. Grant, turning a corner, pausing as if to say something, but choosing not to. He nodded. I nodded back. No words. But for the first time, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like waiting. Some mornings come with a heaviness you can't explain, like the air knows something you don't. It was still, dark when I woke. No alarm, no sound, just an ache I couldn't place, lodged somewhere between my ribs. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and wandered through the hallway barefoot. The Whitmore estate had a way of making you feel like you were walking through someone else's memory. Every doorknob, every framed oil painting, every book on the shelf seemed to belong to a world that had finished breathing years ago. The door to Grant's study was cracked open. I paused. I hadn't seen inside during daylight, let alone in this strange hour between night and morning. Something about it pulled me forward. Inside, the light from the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the walls. Grant stood at the hearth, sleeves rolled up, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, holding a letter over the flames. The paper curled, blackened at the edges, and vanished in ash before I could see what it was. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, he didn't look surprised, just tired. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He shook his head. "Too much memory in this house?" I stepped inside slowly. "Was it important?" He turned to the fireplace. "Everything's important. Until it burns." There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't the cold kind. It was the kind that stretched like fabric, trying to hold something unspeakable. I broke it first. I found a letter. In the library. From my mother. Addressed to your father. His eyes didn't widen. His posture didn't stiffen. He knew. I read it, I added quieter. She forgave him. Grant moved to the corner of the study where an old liquor cabinet stood. He poured himself a drink, neat, but didn't raise it to his lips. He asked me to marry you, he said finally. Not for business, not for you. For him. I felt my hands curl. So I was a favor? He turned toward me, and for the first time, his expression shifted. There was no detachment, no polished reserve, only something bruised and oddly gentle. You were never a favor, he said, but I didn't know that until the day I met you. He crossed the room and pulled open a drawer beneath a cabinet. From inside, he took out a framed photograph and handed it to me. My breath caught. My mother, younger, radiant, standing. In a garden I recognized as the one behind this very house. And beside her, a man with a familiar jawline, a younger version of Grant's eyes. My father loved her, Grant said, but he loved his legacy more. I looked down at the photo. Again. My mother wasn't smiling in it. She looked like someone trying to memorize a moment she knew wouldn't last. He was already engaged to my mother, Grant continued. Arranged, of course, to consolidate assets, as they used to say. He broke it off with your mother quietly, never told her the full truth. Then he left the state, married mine, built a company on silence. I couldn't speak. Not yet. He regretted it, Grant said, softer now, all of it. And before he died, he asked me to find her. Not to apologize, but to do right by what he couldn't. By marrying me. He nodded. By protecting the only thing she had left. You. I sat down, because standing suddenly felt like too much. I thought I was here to pay off a debt, I said. Grant sat across from me, his eyes darker in the firelight. You were, just not the one you imagined. My finger still clutched the photo. She never told me. About him. She wouldn't, he said. She was stronger than he ever was, and maybe stronger than I am. He took a sip of the whiskey, eyes never leaving mine. I didn't think this would mean anything. I told myself I was fixing something, not starting anything. But you... He paused. You're not what I expected. I looked up. What did you expect? Someone breakable. He set the glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But you walked into this house, into this marriage, with your head up and your heart still intact. And you made it impossible for me to pretend that none of it matters. Outside, dawn was beginning to bleed into the edges of the windows. I stood, still holding the photo, and crossed back to the fireplace. I came here thinking I had nothing, I said quietly. But maybe I have more than I thought. Grant didn't reply. But he stood too. Our eyes met, for real this time. Not out of obligation, but recognition. Two people raised by ghosts, trying to find a way forward. Together, or not. But aware now, painfully aware, of where the pain began. I left the study with the photo still in my hand, not because I needed proof, but because I needed reminding that forgiveness, like fire, doesn't destroy. It transforms. There are moments so quiet, so impossibly gentle, that you don't realize they've changed everything until they've passed. That morning, I returned from the study with the photograph still pressed to my chest. I hadn't meant to keep it, but I also couldn't put it down. There was something about my mother's face in that picture. Not quite sorrow, not quite joy, but something in between. Like she'd accepted a truth she never wanted and carried it with grace anyway. I slipped the photo into a drawer beside my bed and changed into something simple. A cardigan. Soft slippers. The kind of clothes I used to wear when mornings weren't heavy, when my world was still small, and the word marriage meant something else entirely. I wandered down the hall toward the kitchen. I didn't expect anyone to be there. Grant was always gone before sunrise, and the staff moved like shadows, quiet and unseen. But when I turned the corner, I froze. He was there. Grant. In a white button-up, sleeves rolled halfway, hair slightly, unkempt. No jacket, no tie, no armor. He stood near the stove, awkwardly holding a kettle with both hands like it might explode. For a moment, I just watched. It was the first time I'd seen him do anything ordinary. The most powerful man in a city, full of polished power, making tea like he didn't quite know how. He turned when he heard me, but didn't speak. Neither did I. Silence again. But not cold this time. Curious. His voice was quieter than usual when he finally said, "There's chamomile, or peppermint." "I wasn't sure what you liked." I blinked. "I usually drink jasmine." He nodded, as if filing it away in a ledger. "Chamomile's fine," I added quickly, almost embarrassed for speaking. He reached for a cup, mismatched, not the porcelain ones the staff used, and placed a tea bag inside with more care than necessary. His hands weren't steady. I noticed that. "You don't have to make me tea," I said softly. "I know," he replied. "That's why I did." We sat at the small round table by the kitchen window, cups between us, steam rising, into the morning light. For a long time, we didn't speak, and I found I didn't need to. I studied his face in the early sun, the way it softened at the edges, lost some of its severity. There were faint lines around his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Not age, not stress, just life. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in years, but who, for whatever reason, still wanted to make tea. I held the warm cup in my hands. The heat sank into my skin, slow and steady. "My mom used to say," I began quietly, "that the most meaningful things are said without words. That when someone does something simple for you, like folding a towel or waiting in silence, that's how you know." Grant glanced over. "Know what?" "That they see you, not just what you can do or what you represent, but who you are." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. There was something in his eyes, not longing, not regret, but recognition, like he saw something he'd been looking for, without knowing he needed it. He stood after a while, walked to a drawer near the fridge, and returned with something wrapped in old parchment. A photo frame. He slid it across the table. I found. "This last night," he said. "Thought you should have it." I hesitated before unwrapping it. It was the same photo. My mother and his father. In the Whitmore garden years ago. But this one had something different. A note on the back. "To Eleanor, the life I didn't deserve, and the love I never forgot." I read it twice, then lowered the frame slowly. Grant's voice was steady when he spoke again. "He never sent it. I think he meant to, or hoped to, but it stayed in that drawer until now." I nodded, my fingers tightening slightly around the frame's edge. "She never told me," I said. "She wouldn't. She lived her whole life trying to protect you from what hurt her." I looked up, and something in my chest cracked. Not in pain, but in release. "Maybe she didn't want me to carry it," I whispered. "Maybe she hoped I'd find something better." Grant leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You already have." I don't remember what we said after that, if anything at all. The tea grew cold. The light shifted. The kitchen filled with the quietest kind of peace. One that comes not from solving everything, but from sharing the weight of it. When I left the room, I didn't feel like someone's obligation. I felt like someone's scene. And from the look in Grant's eyes, so did he. Hospitals have a sound that never leaves you, even when the machines go quiet, even when no one's speaking. There's a hum, low, constant, like time itself is pacing the hallways, waiting for something to happen. That was the sound I heard when I opened my eyes at 3:47 a.m., sitting upright in the visitor's chair, beside my mother's hospital bed. The lamp cast a faint circle of light around her, enough to see her chest rise and fall in rhythm with the machines. She looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile in a way I wasn't ready to name. Her hands were cold. I wrapped them in mine. We'd come in just after midnight, when she collapsed in the kitchen. It had been sudden. A dizzy spell, she'd said. But the look in her eyes told me it was more. I had tried to stay calm, but my voice shook on the phone. My hands fumbled as I grabbed her coat. And then Grant had appeared. No warning, no hesitation. Just him, in the doorway, car keys in hand. "I'll drive," he said, and I let him. We hadn't spoken much during the drive. I was too busy holding Mom's hand in the back seat. But I felt his presence, solid and unwavering, in the front. The way he drove, steady, silent, told me more than words ever could. He didn't ask questions. He didn't panic. He didn't try to make it better. He just showed up. And sometimes, that's all you need. Now, in the stillness of the hospital room, I looked toward the small couch in the corner. He was there, asleep, or at least pretending to be. His suit jacket was folded over the armrest. His tie had been loosened. One arm was resting across his chest like he was protecting something he didn't know how to name. I got up slowly, careful not to wake Mom, and walked toward him. He stirred, opened his eyes. "Didn't mean to fall asleep," he murmured. "You've been here for 5 hours," I whispered back. "You're allowed." He sat up, rubbing his neck. I sat beside him. Not too close, but closer than before. "Thank you," I said after a moment. "For what?" "For not hesitating." He looked at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I wasn't going to let you face that alone," he said. And he meant it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of everything we didn't have the right words for yet. I glanced down at my hands, then over at his. "They say," I said slowly, "that the truest things are the ones we never say." He tilted his head. "Do you believe that?" "I think I used to, when I thought words could lie. And now I think we need both. The silence that holds space, and the words that choose to break it." Grant didn't respond right away, but then he turned toward me, his voice low, deliberate. "I didn't marry you for love. You know that." I nodded, but I stayed, and I showed up. And somewhere between your first morning in that house and tonight, I realized I can't go back to before you. My breath caught. You make it harder to stay cold, and easier to want more. The air in the room felt warmer somehow. Or maybe it was just me, letting something go that I didn't. Even though I'd been clenching, I reached for his hand, not out of romance, out of truth. And he let me. Hours passed. The sky outside began to soften with the first hints of dawn. A nurse peeked in, quiet, efficient, smiled when she saw us sitting side by side. Then a sound, soft, fragile. Isla. It was my mother. Her voice was thin, but clear. I rushed to her side. Grant followed. She blinked, looked at both of us, and gave a tired smile. "Still here," she whispered. "Always," I said, tears stinging. Her gaze shifted to Grant. "You take care of her," she murmured. "I will," he answered without pause, and then she did something I didn't expect. She reached for his hand, held it, and closed her eyes. Later, when the nurse returned and gently asked us to let her rest, I stepped out into the hallway. Grant followed, and we stood in the narrow corridor, surrounded by the quiet rhythm of machines and midnight confessions. "I don't know what this is," I said. "This? Us." He didn't flinch. "I don't either," he said. "But I know I'm not ready to lose it." We walked outside together, into the pale light of early morning. The world was quiet, not empty, just waiting. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't make promises. We just stood there in a silence that had stopped being lonely and started to feel like home. The house had begun to feel different, not warmer, not louder, just lived in, like the walls had started to breathe again. Or maybe it was just me, learning how to stop holding mine in. After the night at the hospital, Grant and I returned home not as husband and wife in name only, but something else. Something quieter, deeper, undefined. We didn't speak of what he said in that room. We didn't need to. He showed it in other ways. He stayed in the kitchen longer in the mornings, started asking if I'd eaten, left books on the reading table I had mentioned, liking little things, but deliberate things. And I let my guard down. That was my mistake. It was a Thursday evening when the past walked into the house. Literally. A fundraiser was being held in the east wing of the estate, something Grant had committed to long before we married. An event for arts and education, full of champagne flutes and polite conversations spoken through tight smiles. I wore a dark green gown. Simple, but it made me feel like someone who belonged. Grant escorted me in, his hand resting gently at the small of my back, and I caught more than one surprised look from the crowd. They weren't used to seeing him with someone, and they definitely weren't used to seeing him look at someone the way he looked at me. I was halfway through a conversation with one of the trustees when I felt the shift, the subtle hush in the room, like a dropped glass that no one saw fall. I turned and saw her. She moved through the guests with practiced ease, tall, graceful, draped in a crimson silk gown that shimmered like intent. Her smile was precise, her eyes sharp, not cruel, just confident. The kind of woman the world never questioned. And when she approached us, Grant's posture changed, not by much, just enough to notice. "Isla," he said quietly, turning to me. "This is Elena Carlyle." She extended her hand, perfectly manicured, slightly tilted chin. "So you're the wife." I took her hand. "Yes. And you are?" "An old friend," she said, "from a time when Grant still returned calls." I smiled politely. "Must have been a very busy time." She laughed, not cruelly, but in that way that says, "I see you, and I know exactly what you're not saying." They spoke for a few minutes, light pleasantries, updates about mutual acquaintances, a gallery opening in New York. I stood beside Grant, silent, observing. Then she turned to me and said, "You must be very brave." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" To take on all of this, she gestured subtly at the house, the crowd, the man beside me. "The Whitmore world isn't for everyone, but maybe it suits you." There was nothing in her tone to accuse, but it landed, like a needle anyway. Grant's jaw flexed, ever so slightly. "Elena," he said, with just a hint of steel in his voice, "Isla isn't taking on anything. She belongs here." She raised an eyebrow. "Of course she does." Then, softly, as if just for me, "I used to think I knew what he looked like when he cared about someone, but I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now." She smiled, this time with something close to sadness, and drifted back into the crowd. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to, because Grant turned to me and said, low and certain, "She wasn't supposed to be here." I looked at him. "Was she?" He shook his head. "Years ago. And even then it was never real." "Then why did it feel like she knew something I didn't?" He hesitated. Not because he was hiding something, but because he was choosing, his words with care. "Because," he said, "you're the only one who could ever make her wonder if she was wrong." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, I found myself sitting on the bench in the garden. The same garden from that old photo. The grass was wet with dew. The moon hung low. Grant came out quietly, jacket off, sleeves pushed back. He sat beside me without a word. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets, the distant sound of a car leaving the drive. Then he said, "I used to live in a house where power meant safety. Control meant success. And love was something you learned to survive without." I turned to look at him. His profile was softer in moonlight, more human. "But then you came," he continued. "And you didn't ask me for anything. You just stayed, even when I gave you nothing." He turned, met my gaze. "And now, I can't go back to before you." There was nothing performative about the moment. No grand kiss, no swelling music. Just that one sentence, and everything it carried. I didn't reply with words. Instead, I reached over and laid my head gently against his shoulder. Not to be held, but to let him know he could lean too. And he did. For the first time. It was the kind of morning that made you forget the world was ever loud. No wind, no birds, just a stillness that settled over the house like soft dust. The fundraiser had passed, but its ripples remained. I hadn't spoken much since the night in the garden. Not because there was tension, there wasn't, but because silence had become something we shared, not something we escaped. There's a different kind of intimacy that grows when two people can sit together and not need to speak. Grant. And I had found that rhythm. A quiet tether, not wrapped in romance or ceremony, but rooted in something steadier. Still, my mind turned over Elena's words more than I wanted to admit. The Whitmore world isn't for everyone. She had meant it as a warning, but I didn't need a warning. I needed clarity, not from her. From him, I spent the morning organizing the library, something I had offered to do weeks ago. Dusting shelves, reordering books by author instead of height. Grant passed by once on a call. He paused in the doorway, eyes soft. "Need anything?" he mouthed. I shook my head. He smiled, a real one, and disappeared down the hall. It was such a small moment, but it mattered more than he knew. Late afternoon, I returned to my room to find something on the writing desk. A single sheet of heavy paper folded in thirds. No envelope, no name. I opened it, expecting a note about dinner, or perhaps a financial update. But the handwriting was unmistakably his. Clean, angled, precise, and yet vulnerable. "Isla, I've been thinking about words. The ones we say too late. The ones we never say at all. My father built his life on silence. He believed that protecting legacy meant burying anything soft, anything human. He never told your mother he loved her, and he never told me he regretted how that ended. But I know he did, because he asked me to fix it. I didn't marry you out of love. That would have been dishonest. I married you because it was right, because I thought that was enough. But now I know. Right and enough are not the same. You changed things, not with speeches or demands, with quiet, with grace. You made this house feel less like a fortress and more like a place someone could come home to. I thought I was protecting you, that by keeping my distance I was being noble, but I was wrong. You never needed distance. You needed honesty, and I didn't give you that. Until now. So this is my honesty. I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but I know I want to try. Because you are not an obligation. You are not a debt. You are not my father's mistake. You are mine, and I hope, one day, I can be yours too. Grant. I read it 3 times. Each word sank deeper than the last. There was nothing dramatic in it. No pleas, no desperation, just truth. The kind that only comes from someone who's been silent too long and is finally ready to speak. That evening, I visited the hospital. My mother was sitting up now, stronger. Her color was returning, her voice steadier. We drank tea together in mismatched paper cups, while the sun dipped beyond the window. I handed her the letter without speaking. She read it slowly, quietly. When she finished, she placed it in her lap and looked at me. "He wrote this?" she asked. I nodded. Her lips trembled, not with pain, but something else, something tender. She reached for my hand and held it for a long time. "Your father once wrote me a letter too," she said softly, "but I never read it." "Why not?" "Because I already knew what it would say, and I didn't need words from someone who left." She looked at the folded paper in her lap again. "But this," she said, "this is different." He stayed. That night, I returned home to find the lights dimmed, the fire in the study glowing low. Grant wasn't in sight, but I knew where he'd be, seated on the balcony, or maybe reading in the library, pretending not to wait for me. I climbed the stairs, the letter still in my coat pocket. At my bedroom door, I paused, then turned, and walked down the hallway, past the paintings, the echoing floors, the spaces that once felt too large to fill. I stopped outside his door, knocked once. When he opened it, he looked more surprised than I expected. I held out the letter. I read. "It," I said, and you're right." He blinked. "About what?" "That you didn't marry me out of love." I stepped forward, but you might have stayed for it. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to, because he did. He reached out gently, as though asking for permission without words, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. His hand lingered there, warm, steady. And in that touch, I found everything the letter hadn't said. I wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he. I used to think love would arrive like thunder, loud, obvious, unmistakable. But here, now, in this quiet house that no longer echoes like a museum, I realize it came like morning light through gauze curtains, soft, slow, and almost unnoticed until everything looked warmer because of it. It's been 3 weeks since the letter, 2 since we started having tea together every morning. No words at first, just steam between us. 1 since I moved my books from the guest room into the library. None of this was spoken aloud. It just happened, like flowers blooming in a place once thought too cold. Grant didn't become someone else. He became someone honest. And in that honesty, I found space for something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. A home. This morning, I woke up before sunrise. The sky was just beginning to shift, soft lilacs and sleepy blue stretching across the windows. I made my way to the kitchen in my robe and slippers, hair still in loose curls from the night before. The kettle was already on. Grant stood by the stove, back to me, shirt wrinkled, his usual polish replaced with something gentler, like he hadn't needed to be impressive for a while now. He turned when he heard me. "Jasmine," he said, holding up the tea canister. I smiled. "You remembered?" "I always do," he replied. Then after a pause, "Even when I pretend not to." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one from months ago, though now it had a bowl of oranges in the center and 2 mismatched mugs that belonged to us, not the estate. He passed me a folded envelope. I raised an eyebrow. "Another letter?" He shook his head. "From you, to you." I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, in my own handwriting. "To the girl I was at 16, I know you're scared. I know you think the world is something that happens to you, not something you shape. But one day, you'll learn that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands still. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it stays. You'll fall in love with a man who doesn't sweep you off your feet, but sits beside you while your world shakes. You won't realize it's love at first, because it won't come with promises or poems. It will come with warm tea and silence and the soft brushing away of fear. You'll wonder if it's enough, and one day you'll understand. It's everything." I looked up. My eyes shimmered. Grant wasn't watching me. He was looking at the steam rising from his cup, like he already knew what the letter said, like he had written it in a different language across every quiet moment we had ever shared. Later that day, we visited my mother. She was sitting in her armchair by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the knitted blanket across her lap. The hospital had discharged her 2 days before, and she'd asked to stay at our place for a little while, which we both knew meant until I stopped feeling like a burden. Grant carried her tea to the armrest without being asked. She smiled at him, tired but content. "You're getting better at this," she said. He raised a brow. "At what?" "At being soft." He laughed, a rare, quiet sound. Isla reached over, brushed a loose hair from her mother's temple. "I never thought we'd be here," she whispered. Her mother looked at both of them. "Neither did I. But maybe that's the point. The best things don't come when we plan for them. They come when we stay long enough for them to find us." That evening, after she'd fallen asleep with a book open on her chest, we sat in the living room with the fire lit, each of us with a blanket, a cup of tea, and a wordless peace. I looked at Grant. Not the version people saw at galas or boardrooms, but the man who drove me to the hospital without question. The man who made tea with shaking hands. The man who said everything in a letter he was terrified to send. "You were right," I said softly. He turned. "About what?" "About the difference between right and enough." He didn't speak. So I leaned into him, laid my head on his shoulder like I had that night in the garden. He rested his cheek against my hair and breathed. "I still don't know how to be the man you deserve," he said. "You already are," I replied. "Because you stayed." There was no music, no fireworks, just 2 people, leaning into a moment that didn't need more than what it already was. Whole, quiet, true. Later that night, after we helped my mother into bed, after the dishes had been washed and the windows latched shut, I sat at the desk by the window and picked up a pen. This time, the letter wasn't to my past self. It was to him. I didn't use fancy words, just a few simple lines. "You don't have to be more than you are. You just have to keep being here, and I will too. I left it on his pillow. And when I woke the next morning, there was a note in its place. Mine. Now. And always. Sometimes love doesn't knock. It waits. And when you open the door, not expecting anything, you find it's been standing there the whole time. Thank you for walking this story to its quiet, beautiful finish. If this story touched something quiet in your heart, a memory, a truth, or simply the comfort of being seen, please consider giving it a like to support the channel. And if you'd like more stories told softly but deeply, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications. Each week we'll be here, with a warm cup of tea, a piece of someone's journey, and something that lingers just a little longer in your heart.